Okay, so what I'm hoping to do this year in 2023 is, hopefully, three or four discussions and some kind of continued involvement with the channel and further discussion. And maybe more of a kind of like a blog kind of situation. I've got two or three people that are wanting to do other discussions, and hopefully those will come together. If anybody watches this one and you feel like there's parts of these discussions that you would like to discuss further, let me know. I'm sort of open to doing discussions with whoever decides they want to come forward with this. So what I want to do is engage more with what's considered challenges to deism, theistic challenges to deism. I've focused in the past on the problems with theism, where and why that step is hard for me to make, and what I feel is sort of unreasonable to make the step to theism. And I think I've been successful in showing that. I'm not the arguments that I'm putting forward don't seem to have any, at least so far, haven't had any reasonable challenges to them. So what I want to focus on is these sort of arguments that seem to come at deism specifically. And one of them is this, because what happens is a lot of additional, this term personal sort of, a lot of people will load that raft up with a lot of different things to come into the discussion and essentially try to argue then for a theistic God. And that's what I'm going to focus on, is sort of the deistic problem with the whole argument here. He gives three reasons. I'm going to break down each of the three reasons and my objections to them. I'm almost positive William Lane Craig himself won't actually share any thoughts back at this, but I thought maybe the audience that I've got might appreciate my thoughts on these objections and how I cover them. And if you disagree, then definitely let me know and we'll get into it. So just a quick summary in case anyone watching this is not a deist. There's a full spectrum of deism out there. People that load up a lot more and more and more onto God. And I'm in the camp of what you would probably call the simplest of that spectrum, where I sort of take this idea that Thomas Paine put forward: the only idea man can affix to God is that of a first cause, and that's where I land. I feel like an argument can be made that the universe had an uncaused first cause, and that we can sort of plant the God flag there. And there's all kinds of, there's a lot of interesting discussion that can be had about that. So, again, if there's any thoughts about that, definitely share them. So, to me, again, these are I'm going to give a few points here that kind of summarize the deist position. Again, like I said, some deists may disagree. So first, the universe had an uncaused first cause. Second, this cause must be, by definition, spaceless, timeless, and immaterial, because this is what we mean by the universe: space, time, and matter. That is the physical universe. That's what we're talking about. And the creator of it does not have to be itself, something consisting of space, time, and material, or in matter. So it could be that it's some other thing that it could, but all we can assume is that we don't actually have to move beyond the assumption that whatever it is, if it caused the universe to exist, is outside of those things. It's not the universe itself. This is what everybody sort of gets hung up on. It is not the claim that there's nothing more to this cause. A lot of people load a lot more onto the deistic position and say that we claim, like the claim that God does not intervene. I've seen no evidence presented that God has intervened or will intervene or is intervening. All it is to say that actually, there's not been a good argument to claim that the cause of the universe actually intervenes and that causes creation. So again, it's the claim that so far we cannot know anything more. I wanted to do a kind of refresher on the argument from incredulity, because it's something that William Lane Craig relies on very heavy here. And if you aren't looking for it, because it doesn't manifest itself exactly as it's defined. So here's how it's defined. The argument from incredulity is a fallacy and informal logic. It asserts that a proposition must be false because it contradicts one's personal explanations, expectations, or beliefs, or is difficult to imagine. So the manifestation of this, as it's written here, would be like when someone hears, for the first time, you could say, a description of evolution by natural selection, and they just go, well, that's just crazy. That's just knucking futs, right? That's the argument from personal incredulity. If this is where the evidence leads, it actually doesn't matter what you think is crazy or what you think is just not possible. If this is where the evidence leads, this is where the evidence leads. But there's other ways in which this manifests itself, and there's a good way. A good example of this is one of Christopher Hitchens' debates with Frank Turek, where Frank Turek is arguing that, well, for the universe to be created required a decision, and this is problematic on many fronts. But he was arguing this it requires a decision, and Christopher Hitchens was saying, where are you getting this choice from? And I think, if I remember right, that's where Frank Turek starts saying, give me another source. Give me another thing. So the idea is that if someone says, okay, the universe was created by a giant purple turtle, if no one is putting out any other explanations, then that one must be true. So the sort of give me another source, if you can't think of one, or if you can't form an argument that says, here's where the universe came from, then mine must be right. So the idea that God created the universe, in Christian standpoint, is for them, it's a lot of this argument from incredulity comes from that. So whenever you hear somebody say, give me another source, then they're sort of demanding an answer for a question that may not have an answer. So an example one is, A is the only explanation I can think of, therefore A must be true. Another example, which manifests itself a lot in William Lane Craig's arguments, I can't think of any explanation other than A or B, therefore A or B must be true. This gets even more complicated when we're talking about explanations and descriptors of things outside of space, time, and matter. You actually don't know what those things are limited to, so it becomes much more problematic. So again, as I already said, this does not allow for the possibility that the explanation is not yet or may never be discovered. All right, so in the video, I'm going to put a link in the description. It may take me a second to figure out. I'll put a link in the description to this video where William Lane Craig gives these three arguments, so you can watch through it yourself. I tried to just transcribe it. So the first argument is, causal explanations can be either of two types. So already, if we're talking about in the natural world, he might have some ground here, although it has a lot of caveats to it. We're talking about something outside of space, time, and matter. We're talking about the causes of the universe. So actually saying can be either of two, you're claiming to know too much. It can be a scientific explanation in terms of laws and initial conditions, or it can be a personal explanation in terms of an agent and his volitions. And the kettle example, a lot of people have heard this. I don't know if you've heard it. So the kettle example is where if you come into the kitchen and the water's boiling on the stove, you can say, why is the water boiling? One answer, goes into the physics of water and what happens when you add heat to it and everything. And then the other answer is that someone wanted tea. Right? That's what he's given these examples. When it comes to the first physical state of the universe, there cannot be a scientific explanation of that in terms of initial conditions and natural laws, because it is the first physical state. There is nothing prior to it from which you could deduce it by natural laws based on prior conditions. So the only kind of causal explanation that's available will be an explanation in terms of an agent and his volitions. And that gives you a personal creator. So let's take this apart piece by piece. Causal explanation can be either of two types. I actually already kind of touched on this. If someone's claiming to know, especially like I said, the cause of the universe, this first claim, causal explanations can be either of two types, is actually not founded at all because we don't know anything about that realm. The realm is the only word I can think of to describe that. But we actually can't observe, test, study, know anything about what is outside of space, time, and matter. So this whole thing is based on this argument that it's one of two types is completely on faulty footing in the first place. It can be scientific explanation in terms of laws and initial conditions, or it can be personal explanation. So the truth here, in giving in this example, is that for both to be true, the scientific preconditions have to be there. So like in the kettle example, they're both dependent on the idea that there's a necessary preconditions. So if you have the agent and its volitions there the agent being, the person wanting tea, the agent and its volitions is I'm intending to make tea. Without the kettle, stove, and water, a power source for the stove, without all of that preconditions there, the agent's volitions don't matter. So when he says the other answer, and he sort of talks about these two answers as though they could be independent, both applicable, or neither. In actually every example, you have to have the scientific explanation. We may not know what that explanation is, but actually in both examples, one won't work without the scientific explanation. When it comes to the first physical state of the universe, there cannot be a scientific explanation in terms of initial conditions, right? This is, further on this idea that he's making claims about something outside of space, time, and matter. And all we can say about the physical universe is that it had a cause. We can't say anything about outside of that physical universe. So that's why the best way I thought of to describe this is this assumes there can be nothing aside from the physical universe we observe. That's it. That's the only thing. That's it. And that he's sort of eliminating all other possibilities. So this is it. But time is part of this universe. So there's actually, just a mistake in the wording here, and it's a failure to conceptualize it correctly, because there can't be anything existing prior to time, because that's a flaw in the discussion. We'll get more into that later. But yeah, the agent and its volitions is a necessary precondition, but there must be something more to that, right? And the way that he's arguing for it here, there is nothing prior to it from which you could deduce, but this argument assumes that what exists, if we want to follow the way he's using this language, then what exists prior to, which is, like I said, it's a mistake in conceptualizing this, but what existed prior to time would be that agent and its volitions in whatever state he wants to imagine that in. So the only kind of causal explanation that's available, again, this is the argument from incredulity. This is the only kind of explanation that's available. This is the only thing I can imagine. Therefore, it's true. So a manifestation of the argument from incredulity, we know nothing of the possible explanations. We don't. And that's why we don't go beyond the idea of an uncaused first cause. Causality is something that only applies to things once time is in the mix. With no time, causality isn't a thing. And that's why you say uncaused first cause, because the cause of time itself would not be bound by time. And I'm hoping I'm not using any confusing words here, but the cause itself would not be bound by time. Therefore, we can't apply causality to it. Right. So additionally, the agent and his volitions alone does not constitute something that can cause something. Now this, I'll get into more of that later and further elaborate on that. Argument 2. The cause of the universe must be timeless and spaceless and changeless and immaterial. Now there are only two possible candidates. Right? I'm sure everybody's already picking up on the problems with this already. There are only two possible candidates that I can think of that could fit this sort of description. Either an abstract object like a number, a mathematical entity, these are timeless, spaceless, and immaterial, or else an unembodied mind or consciousness, a mind without a body. But there's the rub, he said. Abstract objects don't stand in causal relations. That's definitive for what it is to be an abstract object. And therefore, things like the number 7, for example, have no causal effect on anything, from which it follows, therefore, that the cause of the universe must be an unembodied mind. All right, so let's go through this one. There's only 3. We're almost there. The cause of the universe must be timeless and spaceless and changeless and immaterial. There's only one thought I have about this. I have no idea where he gets changeless from. There's nothing we can observe about the universe that, like, change is not something that the universe. I don't know how you get to this changeless. I don't know how you know that. It doesn't really matter to this video. I just wanted to point that out. The changeless part's confusing. I don't know how he gets to that conclusion. Now, there are only 2 possible candidates that I can think of that fit that sort of description. All right, if I were teaching a class at school right now, I would say, and what's this? And that's, of course, argument from personal incredulity. Therefore, everything that follows is on fallacious footing. And it is. This whole argument is based on this one fallacy that's put forth right at the very beginning. Either an abstract object like a number. Okay, so before we go to this, what I mean here is that he's eliminated it down to these 2 possibilities based on what we know about the universe. And we are talking about what is outside this universe. So limiting it down to these 2 things is claiming to know something you cannot know. That's what's important. You can't get down to only these 2 possibilities. That's it. You can't get down to just that. Either an abstract object like a number, a mathematical entity, right? This is again an argument that requires knowledge of the. All right, so I've already covered this. Got ahead of myself a little bit. Knowledge of a realm we have no reason to conclude anything about because we cannot actually interact and study it. But there's the rub. Abstract objects don't stand in causal relations. That's definitive for what it means to be an abstract object, right? Obviously, I agree with him there. A conceptualized thing like a 7, the number 7, it doesn't matter. And therefore, things like the number 7, for example, have no causal effect upon anything, and so on. From which it follows, therefore, that the cause of the universe must be an unembodied mind. There's several reasons this falls apart. First is the argument from incredulity. You can't eliminate it down to just those 2 because that's all we or you could fail to think of. You can't actually reduce it down to those things. Okay, so aside from the continued manifestation of the argument from personal incredulity, this argument contains 2, I feel, fatal flaws. We actually have no reason to conclude that the mind can in fact exist without a body. And that's true. I will defend that argument. And of course, it might take a separate discussion, but we actually have no reason to conclude that that's the case. We have every reason to think otherwise. That a mind, as far as we know it, or a consciousness cannot exist without its body. And I could go into that in another discussion. But second, and this is the most important part, an unembodied mind cannot stand in causal relations to anything either. If you imagine what your mind is and what your consciousness is, and you pull it aside from your body, it cannot cause anything at all. From the best we know, if we were able to make the mind or consciousness exist outside the body, there's no reason for us to think it could cause anything. The only reason that I can cause this pen to move from one side of the table to the other is because I have a body. So if we assume what he's saying is true, that there can be an unembodied mind, we actually have every reason to think that it can't cause anything. So the argument itself, aside from being on fallacious footing, it falls over on itself because its own conclusion actually doesn't play out, and it doesn't scale correctly with what we know about the universe, or what we can know at this moment about the universe. The unembodied mind actually can't do anything, can't cause anything. So argument 3, and this is the longest one, but I'll try to go through it pretty quick. It's the only one in which you can explain how to get an effect with a beginning from an eternal cause. If the cause is sufficient to produce its effect, then the cause is always there and is permanent, then the effect should be always there as well. For example, if the cause of water freezing is temperature being below 0 degrees Celsius, then if the temperature were below 0 degrees from eternity past, it would be impossible for the water just to begin to freeze a finite time ago. So, okay, well, I'll read the rest of it first. Any water that was around would be frozen from eternity. If the cause is there, its effect must be there as well. So how do you get a cause which is permanent and eternal and an effect like the universe, which only began to exist 14 billion years ago. And I do appreciate that he doesn't hop on the silliness of the young Earth creationist train. The only answer to this conundrum, I think, is if the cause is a personal agent endowed with freedom of will, who can therefore create a new effect spontaneously without any antecedent conditions. All right. It's the only way in which you can explain how to get an effect with a beginning from an eternal cause. So, again, we're talking about space-time and matter, the universe. The cause of time, right? So to say that the cause of time is eternal is already a problem, because time is part of the effect. So this is why he calls it timeless, right? It's very easy to once you start conceptualizing, thinking about what these things mean, you reach this point where you say, okay, that cause exists outside space, time, and matter. That's why I use words like timeless that he used in the very beginning. A cause cannot be timeless and eternal. It either exists in the realm of time or not. So eternal implies that it is existing on some level of time. And that is not the case once you conclude that it's the cause of time. It doesn't actually play out that way. Now there has to be two levels of time. One in which this cause exists on, which causes another level of time in that universe. So it's actually just a failure to conceptualize it correctly. If the cause is sufficient to produce its effect, then the cause is always there. Then if the cause is always there, right, so I wanted to just say this. Obviously, this continues along this train of flawed reasoning to say that the cause of time is always there, right? That's already a problem. And it's permanent, then effect should always be there as well. Again, time is part of the effect. So another way to say this that I like to phrase it as when I'm trying to have these conversations is that time is passing because the cause of time is. That cause isn't we don't have any reason to conclude that it's on some level of time. Those conditions are there, therefore time is here. So it actually doesn't, it kind of proves the reverse of what he's trying to prove. But we could get into that more definitely. But already, the argument from incredulity is here, and the inability to conceptualize something outside of time is on full display. All right. For example, if the cause of water freezing and the temperature is below 0 degrees, I think he says Celsius. I'm used to saying Celsius. Maybe that's wrong. Then if the temperature were below 0 degrees from eternity past, it would be, all right, I'm sure everybody sees that already. Again, presumes to know too much about a realm we cannot analyze. The analogy breaks down when one considers, as we have already discussed, that time is part of the effect. So there's several problems with the water freezing analogy. And first is that if the universe is the frozen water, then there is some sort of universe, there is some sort of precedent material existing from the universe to actually change into the ice. And we don't have any reason to conclude that. So, again, you have to imagine those levels of time and how he's misusing this discussion of time in order to make it sound like it says something it doesn't. If the cause of time itself is not temporal, and it would exist in a realm that's not actually bound by time as far as we know, so therefore that cause of time, it is. You don't say the cause of time was or is no more, because we don't know that there's actually a level of time that cause exists in. So the cause of time is, therefore time is, right? Time is passing. Hopefully I'm not just confusing everybody with that. It does take a minute to think about when you really start trying to conceptualize what that argument is, but William Lane Craig does have a tendency to make the argument, to use some kind of language that makes the argument essentially above the audience's head, and nobody spends much time thinking about it. But if you sit down and think about what it really means to say the cause of time has existed forever, right? Already, it's problematic. It's something that exists outside the realm of time. Therefore, that cause and those conditions that result in time are. We can't say that they were, they are. Now time happens. So anyway, if that's too confusing, just let me know. So how do you get a cause which is permanent and eternal, and an effect like the universe, which only began to exist 14 billion years ago? The only answer to this conundrum, I think, again, this is the only answer I think. It's the only thing he can conceptualize. Therefore, it must be correct, which makes it not an argument, makes it a fallacious argument. Is if the cause is personal agent endowed with freedom of will, who can therefore create a new effect spontaneously without any antecedent determining conditions. So antecedent is to talk about the cause of time and then refer to antecedent conditions to the cause of time is, again, a failure to conceptualize it correctly based on the parameters of the discussion. So for those three reasons, I think we have very powerful grounds for thinking that this is not simply an unclosed first cause, but this is a personal being, a personal agent which has chosen freely to bring the universe into existence. So the phenomenon of choice, and this is obviously the objection I would have raised to Frank Turek, who talks about this. That's his main argument for personal creators, to talk about has to be something with the ability to choose. And that's just something we know about our experience. To go as theists tend to do and try to make the cause of the universe very anthropomorphic, try to push it into looking like us. The more and more you try to make it look like us, the more problems you come into. Choice is actually just something we realize about ourselves. And it's also necessarily temporal, because there's a time where you had not made that choice and then a time after you had made that choice. It has to be temporal in order for choice to apply. If the cause of the universe is timeless, outside of space, time, and matter, choice is not something we can apply to it. I hope that makes sense. If anybody needs me to elaborate on anything, just let me know. But that's essentially what I wanted to go through. That's his three arguments and what I feel destroys all three of them, why they're not convincing at all. And mainly, you have to realize that, say, okay, if we allow someone to argue that God is personal, and you say, okay, well, what if God's personal? Then all of a sudden comes that raft of theism where they start loading it down with all kinds of other things. On top of all of this, the reason we conclude that I conclude, there's no reason to conclude God is personal, because there's just no evidence for it. But then on top of that, the theistic God, as we know, the universe that we live in looks very much like the universe if there were no concerned overseeing moral intervening divine power. This looks exactly like the universe if that did not exist. Right. And you can go into my other videos to see why that is. Why I feel that the actual end of all these arguments about God being personal and actually having some type of personhood to it, that where it can think and look at things, and the conclusion to all that is theism. And this is just not the universe where a theistic God, where the existence of a theistic God is forthcoming. It just doesn't. The evidence isn't forthcoming. Anyway, hopefully that was interesting. Let me know what you think. Agree, disagree. If you would like to get involved in some of the discussions, let me know, or just put it in the comments. Right. So I hope everybody thought it was interesting.